Okay, so it's now time to start, I think. Probably a few more going to join, but we'll get started and welcome everybody to another Tascam webinar. Today, I'm Chris Wright, and today we're going to be talking about some more advanced tips and tricks for video streaming with Tascam VS-R264 and 265. And take a little bit into a deep dive of some of the useful things that you can do and that you can use to your advantage when you're installing these products. And what I'm going to do is to do a short presentation, and most of the session today is going to be practical, so showing you how you can achieve certain things that people ask. And then there'll be time for some Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully I can pick the right one this time. Let's have a look. Screen 2, that's the one I want to share. Okay. Is out the way. Okay, so thanks for everybody for joining. And I see a few more of you joining. So Tascam VS-R264 and 265. Most of you have joined a presentation we did before, and these products were out last year. Just a quick recap. The VS-R264 is a 4K UHD streamer recorder. So it streams, encodes, decodes, and records all at the same time. And this one uses either H.265 HEVC codec or the H.264 codec. And the VS-R264 with identical features, apart from the fact it supports just the H.264 video and goes up to full HD. They're standalone appliances designed for streaming, dedicated to the task. It's simple to install and configure, and key point, once they're installed and configured, you don't need a computer for them to stream. Okay, so the main features are, as I said, up to 30 megabits per second encoding of video, both in 4K or HD. And that is low bit rate. It allows for very high video quality over standard networks, because typically you'll be using 5 or 6 or 4 megabits per second, and via the internet. They simultaneously decode up to 4K UHD if you've got a VS-R265, and they're compatible with major streaming protocols. RTMP is one of the most common ways of getting to the web platforms, the online platforms. RTP, UDP, and Unicast or Multicast around your LAN, all point-to-point across the web. And then a couple of server formats, which are Rtsp and HLS, which is the HTTP live streaming. So Unicast and Multicast, that means one-to-one or one-to-many over a LAN, and simultaneous streaming in multiple formats. So key point of the VS-R264 and 265 is that they support fully professional balanced inputs and outputs up to plus 20 TBU, and they have unbalanced audio embedding and de-embedding for consumer level equipment, which many of the other products in the marketplace don't have. And that's a key point if you're wanting to deliver good quality audio and good quality video together, then you need proper balanced connections to connect your audio mixer or your wireless mics or whatever you have there. So the recorder function records directly to SD cards or USB storage. And I noticed that maybe you're not seeing that. Can somebody just tell me, because it looks like you might not be seeing that, but I hope you are. Okay, and external storage on USB 3. And then automatic upload of recorded files to FTP servers. So
we're actually seeing you and not a shared screen.
You're not seeing a shared screen yet? That's strange, because it says I'm screen sharing. Okay, let me just go back, turn off and stop the sharing, and I'll try that again. Thanks for letting me know whoever that was, and let's try that. Let's share screen 1 then in that case. Doesn't seem to want to do screen 2. Are you seeing that now? Should be a sheet with all features. Okay, thanks. Sorry about a little hitch. Okay, so going through the features again. You've seen these before, and you can have the file afterwards, presentation file. So we're talking about automatically uploading files, recorded files to FTP server, and you can use that as a way to keep the units clean, because they can delete the files from the USB or local storage once they're securely on the FTP storage. And if you've got unattended unit, you don't want to be cleaning off the SD card or the USB drive for every session. So it's a browser-based remote to configure the settings, and we support gigabit Ethernet or 100 megabits, and you don't need, because it's low bitrate encoding, you don't need QoS or special configuration. Another key point, they support powering over the Ethernet connection. It's PoE Plus, which is a higher power than PoE, so be aware it does require PoE Plus. It won't run on PoE, but PoE Plus is up to 25 watts per port, and PoE is only up to 15, and that means only up to 13 at the device. And as we take from 12 to 16, then we need a PoE Plus connection. Or they're powered from the standard AC adapter, Tascam VS-R264 and it can be powered from both. It can have redundancy, so if the power adapter fails, it power up a PoE, for example. And then a compact 1U size, similar to our DSP units. In fact, a family with our DSP units. So the target applications that we have for these products are presentations or video conference overflow. So there's essentially one presentation room being connected to other presentation rooms and via the cloud, so people can be watching this presentation while recording it. Live stream recording for lecture capture, governance, education, online training sessions, for example. Live streaming for House of Worship. We have many installations for House of Worship, wedding chapels, and funeral homes, in fact. And while this lockdown has been going on, people still want to see, and can't attend, but they want to see. So that's another application. Then for theatres and music venues, quite a number of those going online right now. Here's an application for connecting two sites together over the internet. It could be a virtual concert. We've got a live concert in one city and a virtual concert set up in another location, or it could be, in the case of House of Worship, it could be from one part of the campus to another, one church to another. And they could also be used for general video distribution, although if it's really just for decoders, a VS-R isn't truly the best thing to just use for a decoder, even though you can, but because it also has the capability for encoding in both units. So for this webinar, the topics that we're going to cover are not really the features of the product, but how you use it. So one very nice utility called Restream Dot Io allows you to send an RTMP stream from the VS-R and then deliver to multiple online platforms at the same time, up to 30 or even over 30. The next point we're going to cover is point-to-point streaming over the internet, and then as part of that, looking at how you use port forwarding to utilize a public IP address rather than your local address of your LAN. So essentially exposing your VS-R encoder or decoder with a public IP address. Then a quick dive into the different video streaming protocols they are, what they are, why they are, where they came from, and what you would use for what kind of application. Then using the VS-R decoder for confidence monitoring. So essentially, if you have an encoder and you want to see what your audience sees, which means it's been through the encoding and decoding process, you can use the VS-R's decoder to do that. And we have several applications I've seen already where this has been a key point. And you can go via a local network connection, or you can go via a public IP address, so you know that it's getting up to the internet and back down. And then connecting multiple players and multiple decoders to a VS-R. You know, how can you do this? So questions have come up. And we're going to actually look at a little bit of the FAQ document that's being put together and should be published quite soon. So first of all, Restream Dot Io. What is this about? Well, this is an online platform that you can send your RTMP stream from the VS-R to it, and you can configure it to send off that RTMP stream simultaneously to multiple platforms. So I'm going to do a little demonstration of this. I'm going to show how it's set up and streaming to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, and how that's set up in the VS-R and on the Restream. So it uses APIs to connect. So it will want to connect if you say ask it to go to YouTube. It will ask you to pair, and then you get some. It will access through the API, the Google, accessing your Google account, so it knows where to send it and knows what your stream key is. And you can set up custom configurations. So if you want to use it to send off to some platform that isn't shown in the list that we showed earlier, and you can add, for example, a daycast to that, because you just send off via an RTMP stream or a panopto. It's not shown there, but you can still use it. So Restream.io, you can have a free account, which can do a Facebook personal profile as well as all the others. And if you want a Facebook public profile or group profile, you have to pay a monthly subscription, which isn't too much. But it can also do other functions such as transcoding, so it can make multiple bit rates as well as multiple streams. So every online platform has a set of guidelines they provide for how they like the video delivered. So if you're using Restream, what you need to do is to find the common format that they all support. So for example, you know, Facebook doesn't do 4K right now, so there's no point trying to do 4K if you want to include Facebook. So HD only, whereas YouTube will do 4K. So, and again, you need to set the keyframes and the resolution, the audio bitrate to match all of them. So that's a little bit of work to dig out the requirements for each of those. And as I mentioned, you're free of charge for 30+ platforms, and can offer transcoding. So this is what Restream looks like. And what I'm going to do now is to swap to turn off my sharing, go back to the screen. Okay. And in fact, no, I'm not. I'm going to go back, make sure I've got that screen. Yes, okay. And let's swap to my streaming dashboard. So this is the Tascam streaming dashboard. You saw this before. You can access it through its access to a web browser, and there's a discovery app that shows you where the IP addresses are of your VS-Rs connected to your network. What I'm going to do right now is disconnect my decoder and look at the encoder control. So what I've set up in the encoder settings is I've set my settings here so that I've got full HD, because I'm going to go simultaneously to Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. Constant bit rate, most of the online platforms like that, and a 4 megabit bit rate here. normal quality and latency, high profile, and then 128 kilobits for the audio. So those are the settings. So I'm coming in with my 4K signal from my laptop. That's what I'm going to be streaming. And what I'm going to be streaming is my second screen. And I'm going to put a video on there and have that running full screen over there. And my output settings, so I've got RTMP set up with my URL for here for Restream Dot Io, and the stream key follows a slash right there. So let's just swap to, it's turned off at the moment, so I'm going to turn off all my outputs. They're all turned off here. And so I'm not streaming. Let's look at Restream. So here's my Restream dashboard. I've got my different accounts set up. They're already paired for 3 different accounts. And I've got my web page. That's for Twitch. It's not running right now. Facebook, my Facebook account. It says it's live, but it's actually not. Let's refresh it. And that will come up and show you it's not live. I did do a little test earlier, so it's got my screen here. And my YouTube is here. Let's just go back. What's that? Oh, unfortunately, is YouTube. So this is my YouTube dashboard as well. So that's the stream now from YouTube Studio. So when I start to, first of all, I'm just going to hit the button on the front of the VSR. So it will start to stream. And I'm going to start my video playing. So that's streaming, and my video is going to be starting in a minute. There we go. Let's just start that. So if we look at Restream, it's got, now it's starting to work. And it should, in a second, it should come up with my video. As long as I've done this right. Is that running? It seems like it is. Perhaps it's not on that. Oh, there we go. Here it is. So now that's connecting. I should see this coming up on, oh, in fact, there is something not right. Sorry about this little technical hitch with where the screens are. There we go. Okay, so that's, oh, it seems to want to, I'm going to turn my PowerPoint off. That's why it's, okay, let's go back to my video. For some reason it doesn't want to be on my second screen, so let's bring that back in. Make that full screen again. So let's just move it over a little bit. That should now go full screen on that. So there'll be a little bit of delay. You'll see that, so there we go. So there's full screen. So if I now look at YouTube, you should see that YouTube has started to run. There we go. And I'll refresh that. It says it's live, but it hasn't updated in the screen yet. Okay, so there's YouTube. That's gone live. We look at Facebook. I'll refresh that. Okay, that's now live. Let's see what that says. So there's my live on Facebook. And if I go to Twitch, that's already live. So there's the 3 different outputs running from Restream. And you can turn on and off individual ones if you want. I've got them all enabled. So basically one stream going from there, and in Restream, this is where you find your stream key here and your URL. And you can make that persistent, so it's usually persistent, and you can also reset it if you want to reset it after each one. So essentially that's a single stream now from the VS-R, as we see running here, and going up to Restream, and from there to Facebook, to Twitch, and to YouTube. So that's my YouTube studio. So essentially that's quite straightforward. Once it's set up, it goes off, and despite a couple of issues with which screen and which video, that's essentially now streaming live in 3 different screens. So that's the first sort of application. That's a really useful application with Restream to be able to distribute in much more than a single VS-R can do right now. So VS-R does one RTMP, it does multiple stream formats, it does one RTMP, it can do simultaneously then 2 unicasts, one unicast, one multicast, and an HLS and an Rtsp. So it can do 6 different streams at the same time, but only one RTMP right now. So if I just press the button again on front of VS-R, that will then go offline. So there we go, it's just immediately gone offline. So let's come back to the presentation, and hope you're all seeing that. Let me know if you, okay, let's go to stop the share. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is look at the next topic, which is to use the VS-R as a conference monitor and look at public IP addresses. So I'm going to put what's going into the VS-R up on the screen behind me to do that, show it as using it as a conference monitor, and then I'm going to switch it to use an IP address that I publish from the web. So let me just go back again to my VS-R. Let's switch to share. And I'm going to share my screen 1. Go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so next point. Okay, so as I mentioned, multiple stream formats simultaneously, and up to 6 different stream protocols. And the RTMP and RTMPS is a secure version of RTMP using encryption. And that's used by Facebook, but RTMP is used by many other platforms, YouTube, browser, Daycast, Twitch. And HLS is Apple's HTTP live streaming, which can be used in many browsers, can stream to iPads and iPhones, they can natively support it, and Android as well, and for various CDNs, such as Ustream browser and Akamai. And Rtsp is a server format that we're going to look at in a little bit. I'm just going to do a little dive, first of all, into the streaming protocols. So RTMP, real-time messaging protocol, and this was developed a long time back as a Flash server and client for Macromedia, which was then acquired by Adobe. And of course, Flash has been disappearing, mostly driven by the fact that it wasn't supported by Apple, and it's become the replacement has been HTML5, but the RTMP is still used to deliver, as the protocol, still used to deliver transport stream where Flash isn't involved anymore. So then HLS, HTTP live streaming, it was developed by Apple and as an alternative to Flash, and they developed it as an adaptive mechanism for adaptive bitrate streaming. And it works in a completely different way. And this was required when you're, for example, streaming across for instance, mobile networks where the connections might not be so good. And the way that HLS works in a pull format is that it, rather than a push of frames out, which is what RTMP does, and others like RTP also do that, HLS basically buffers, creates small chunks of files, 1 or 2 seconds in length and a number of them, in the encoder in a buffer, and offers those up as a little playlist, which is then continuously updated with the available chunks that can be read. And the receiver, or the decoder for HLS, reads those chunks and can buffer them. So in fact, it allows for retries, because if there's a bad network connection or bad mobile connection at that point, it can reread the chunk. And it makes the streaming process more robust. But it does have higher latency. So you can manage that latency in terms of how many file chunks there are and how many what the size of the file chunks are. But you know, it allows for streaming at higher bit rates across networks and across the web than the others. But you pay for that with high latency. RTP is a real-time transport protocol, good on real-time transport protocol, and it was developed for point-to-point or one-to-many connections over IP networks. It runs over UDP or TCP, and UDP is user datagram protocol. It's a very simple push-type mechanism. The packets come out, there's no retries or anything like that. And TCP has got some retries, so it can use that as well. Whereas if you want the lowest latency over using RTP, UDP is the best way to go. So multicast allows transfer to multiple destinations, and there the switch supports so the switch has to be configured to support multicast, and then the switch replicates what's coming in on a multicast IP address for one of its ports to all the other ports. So anyone who wants to connect can get a stream. Now, IT managers tend not to like multicast because it essentially broadcasts traffic on every port that some of the ports may not need. Okay, so Rtsp, real-time streaming protocol. So this was developed by Real Networks with Netscape and Columbia University. And it's really a server format which provides not just the stream, but also a set of commands like tape, VHS tape commands, play, stop, pause for the stream. And so it uses 2 types of protocols. It uses a real-time transport protocol plus a real-time control protocol, which is operates the player. So in fact, you can even turn an Rtsp server, if it supports it, into a recorder, and you can say here's a stream coming from the client back to the server, rather than the server delivering a stream to the client. But it's implemented in software decoders and VLC, for example, and it comes out on a default port number of 554. So just remember that number, because we're going to be looking at that afterwards. Now, there are some other protocols. Dash is one that's up and coming. So Mpeg-Dynamic adaptive streaming over HTTP. And again, this is a streaming protocol that is similar to HTTP live streams, similar to HLS. It supports multiple bit rates, and because of that, it's supported in many content delivery networks, and natively in Windows 10 Edge browser. So there are some browsers that have these built in, and then some software players as well. So as we said, VS-R is extremely versatile, and we can stream via the web to online platforms and simultaneously decode, and that decode can come from decoding on a VS-R, or it can come from the decoding on the same VSR. So it can be another VSR in another run, or if you want as a confidence monitor, you could have the VSR decoding its own encoded stream. And so along with Unicast and Multicast, so I mentioned Multicast uses a switch to replicate these streams. Unicast goes between one IP address and another. So you specify the destination. So for the encoder, you specify the IP address of the decoder. So you can target a specific IP address. So what we're going to do here is look at how we use these formats, point to point over the internet, exposing a VSR stream service via a public IP address. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, Google is your friend here. You can Google your public IP address. Simply go to Google, as I'm going to do now, and go back to my web browser. Is Google, what's my IP? Well, you can see it already here. That's my public IP address, and my public IP address changes every time I reboot my router. I could ask for a fixed one, ask my ISP to give me a fixed one, but my one changes. And you can see that I've got both an IP version 4 address that we're going to use, because that's what we use within VSR. And I do have an IPv6, but it's not showing me that. So as well as that, I can go into my settings for my router. I'm going to show you here. I'm going to go to English and log in. This is the browser access to my router. When that's come up, you can see I've got a number of services going to Wi-Fi frequencies and a LAN and my voice. And on the internet, if I click that, you can see also here, you see my IP address. That's my public IP address that my router has on the internet. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So as I mentioned, the different stream protocols use different methods. So RTP or UDP Unicast is a push stream protocol. It uses an IP address and a port number to direct a stream at a specific receiving device, the decoder or player. So it can be sent to a public IP address. And what that means is if I send it to, if I make, in fact, my colleague makes his VSR available through as a public IP address, I can send him a stream. Now, RTP and UDP Multicast really only works over a LAN, and it uses a range of IP addresses that are specified as being from 224.0.0.1 up to 239.255.255.255, and you can use any of those addresses. So you can support multiple multicast streams if you've got more than one encoder, and you put in a port number that above 1024 and below 49151. And then the time to live recommended setting is 5. What does time to live mean? Well, that's the maximum number of hops between different switches that you can use. So HOS streaming configures the VSR as a web server. So it comes up as a web server, and web servers communicate on port 80 by default. And so it's using standard HTTP messages. So if you expose a VSR to a public IP address and you expose port 80, that means that essentially I've got a web server that any client can connect to on a public IP address and receive a stream. And Rtsp, as I mentioned, streams on port 554, so exposing this port will allow any decoder or software players to access the stream from the VSR encoder. So how do we use port forwarding? Okay, well, configuring internet router. This is the view of my router, and I'm going to show this. So let's go back to my browser GUI for the router. And it will be called, in your router, it will be called port forwarding or network address translation. Here, what I've set up, so this is the IP address of my VSR. You can see that in the VSR streaming dashboard, just here. Okay, and you can have multiple VSRs, so you can then publish here as a rule. I've added a rule, I've created a rule here that says, take this on this IP address, publish internal ports 554 to 554, so then just port 554, to an external port 554. And this is to support Rtsp, because that uses port 554. And so I've called this service my VSR Rtsp. And what happens then is that anything that comes on to or from port 554 on this IP address is exposed by my public IP address on port 554. And I can create other rules. You can see how I can do that. Just simply create a rule. I can go to a custom service, so I can select one that it already knows about. You've got some other domain name server, it will know how to handle that. My router will know that. But if I select the custom service, then it allows me to put a name, it allows me to put this IP address of the VSR in here, and it select the ports that you're going to expose and the protocol it's going to use. Well, I'm going to use TCP or UDP. Yeah, so I select that. So this is a way that you add a rule to for port forwarding. I've added another rule, which is VSR RTP Unicast, where again, the same IP address for the VSR, TCP UDP again, but this time I'm going to publish ports from 1000 to 1500. I could have included this in this rule, but I wanted to make it clear, because I'm going to use, for my RTP, I'm going to use a port number 1234, just an arbitrary number, so I'm publishing that in this address. I've added another rule, which is publishing port as TCP, because it's a web server. So I'm publishing on port 80. So essentially my VSR is becoming my web server on my public IP address by exposing port 80 publicly. And so once I've done that, let's go to my VSR. What I'm going to do is in my output settings, I'm going to enable, for example, Unicast. So Unicast is set up, as I mentioned, we can use UDP or RTP. I'm going to use UDP here. And I've put in the port number 1234, and I'm going to unicast to my VSR decoder on the same IP address. That's my local IP address, 192.168.1.97. And then I'm going to have this, turn this one on. And in my VSR decoder, let's go to the decoder control. In my stream settings, I can select my VSR, my own VSR unit, which is called VS-R265 demo, or I can select another encoder where I put in whatever format I want. If I select my VSR demo and then I select Unicast, it's come up as UDP or RTP. I'm going to use UDP. It's come up with a port address, but I can enter that 1234. And if I click apply, what is going to happen is that my VSR is going to be decoding my input. So that should be now decoding. So you see that status is okay. I can disconnect or reconnect it here. So if I stop my sharing and show my camera, what you'll see is that behind me, I've now got that video that's going on my second screen, still playing, coming up on the screen behind me. And if I stop the streaming, for example, you see that will stop, just to show it is actually working. And okay, so now I've just stopped that on my VSR, and I'm going to restart it. There is a delay of a couple of seconds, because that's what you get with RTP encoding and decoding. So I've just started again, and you'll see that this will pick up when it starts to. Here we go. So that's coming via my local IP address. Now, let's go back and turn on the sharing again. So that means I've got a view of what's coming in to my VSR. I've got a view of what it looks like once it's encoded and decoded. So I'm seeing what the consumers of my stream are going to see. But let's say that what I want to do is use my public IP address. Well, I had my public IP address, which is this one. Let's just copy that. And I'm going to put the Unicast, my encoder, I'm going to send this off, my output settings, to my public IP address rather than my local IP address. So that means that because I've got the port forwarding rule, let's change that to public IP address and apply that. And because I've got the port forwarding set to direct anything on the internet to this IP, to this IP address as well, to my VSR, my stream settings, I can, in fact, I'm going to set it up as another decoder so it doesn't know anything about this. Some other decoder coming from somewhere else. It's coming in on Unicast, UDP, of this port. So this will again, once this is going, I'm going to stop sharing and you'll see that this will now still appear, even though now it's coming and directing it to a public IP address. And this will appear for a couple of seconds, I hope. Unless we've got some, let's check that I did make that work. It hasn't come up yet. Oh, I don't know why, but okay, let's do this in a different format. So that port, maybe just check that that port number is the same port number as I had before. Just go back to my 193.204.216. That should be streaming, but it isn't for some reason. Let's go back to my decoder and I made a mistake. Disconnect and reconnect. Check the stream settings. Just set to UDP. I'm pretty sure that's working. Okay, we're going to do this a different way. Let me just go back to the output settings. Instead of streaming on Unicast, I'm going to stream on HLS. And my HLS server can be on this address. That's where it's actually streaming to. Okay, that's the URL of this unit. Turn on this streaming, then go back to decoder, and I'm going to set this up to bring in HLS stream, and the URL is going to be http /181, that's the IP address, /live/playlist 3U8. So now I'm trying to receive this on the decoder from this IP address. So that should be connecting to the stream that I'm publishing. And we'll see if this comes up. Okay, I've just set up this, and for some reason, maybe it's my port, it's my router's not publishing it anymore. But okay, that's how you set up your to receive from a public IP address. I wonder if it's something to do with the fact that I was in that screen on the router. So let's just put my share back on. And I'll share the screen again. So it didn't come up on the public IP address, but that's the mechanism. I've got some local difficulty which I didn't have when I tested this last night. But so essentially, what I had done was to use my encoder control, set my output to HLS. Okay, and this is the URL. Just copy the URL. Then I can go to my decoder control, and I can put either my local connection, which has got the same URL, and if I apply that, that should come directly on the screen. And that's receiving from the local, so receiving from its own device. So I just stop my share, you'll see that that's now working. Okay, and if the port forwarding is set up correctly, then let's turn off the screen. Then you can change the IP address here to be your another encoder, HLS, and instead of having that address, you can have the IP address. Let's just try that again. 81.193. What was it? 204.216. 204.216. Yes. And let's see that. 204. And that should receive the stream on that IP address if it's being published. And my guess is that maybe I need to check that again on my router, because I don't see it being, it doesn't seem to start. And it didn't start in RTP either, so possibly something with my local settings. Anyway, that's the main way that you configure to go point to point or across the web. And if I'm going to an IP address anywhere else, I can set up for my encoder control, I can set up Unicast to go off to an IP address that somebody else has given me where their receiver is, and that can be anywhere across the web. And the same for Rtsp. So I can set up Rtsp, and let's turn this on and look at how Rtsp works, for example, with a VLC player. So let's turn on Rtsp. I'm going to turn off HLS right now. And so Rtsp is going to be, it's got this default URL. I can copy the URL. And now locally, it's sending an Rtsp server. Let's turn on VLC. And in VLC, under Open Network Stream, I can put this URL in, and that should then play what's being streamed on the VSR. Let's wait for that to open. And there we go. So that's now playing directly the stream from the VSR. And again, that VLC could be somewhere else across the web. Little glitch there, but that's the VLC playing what we're using. Okay, it seems like there is some kind of problem here, but let's go back to let's pause that and go back to the PowerPoint. So once you've set up these rules, you've got your services, it's quite easy to test it. I think I probably need to reboot my router because I've been doing various things for the router. But it's useful to have the decoder, VS-R decoder as a confidence monitor, because then you really see what's going on in the same way that your audience is going to be seeing it. And so, for example, we had an installation in a theater which was going to be used for weddings back in the US, and Now the VS-R was up in a control room, and they really needed to see what was that they had both audio and video, and so they had the decoder set up just to stream RTP to the decoder, and then a small monitor and some speakers connected to the VS-R, and that meant that they knew that they had a good encoding, camera and audio before they went live on YouTube. So that's the purpose of having a confidence monitor. So that is a benefit. And a pass-through connection, we get asked for that. Do we have a pass-through connection? We don't. We have a decode output. But a pass-through connection is useful to see, instantly what's coming in, what signals you've got. But it can be misleading if you think that that's what's going to the web, because it may not be. So it's actually, if you need a pass-through connection, then what you really need is a little HDMI splitter, which you can have for under 20 Australian dollars, I think. But anyway, RTP streaming, when you configure it to a specific IP address, you direct your encoder output to that address, and you can do that to two different addresses at the same time, two different devices at the same time, because there are two Unicast outputs. And then for HLS streaming, you can send, it goes out on port 80. And if you expose port 80 to a public IP address, then some external connection can be made to the HLS streaming. And because it's a server, multiple connections can be made, although there are limits. So we're going to get into that, how you connect multiple decoders to a VS-R. And there are limits. We had a question that came up, I want to stream to YouTube, but can I publish an IP address to let a lot of VLC connections be made? So if I've got my other, my audience is going to be somewhere around the local area network or using VLC, and they're going to be on the web. Now, the answer to that is yes, but there are limits, because you can't, whereas the VS-R is a server, it's not a full-blown, HP server. It's a mini server. It's not intended for supporting hundreds of client connections concurrently. So let's talk about that a bit. So you can have, you can have two RTP Unicast and multiple multicast clients connected. So that means that multicast is the best way to support multiple connections if you're on a LAN. So there, you could send one stream to the switch on an IP address above 224.0.0.1, and then on that IP address, any computer device on the network can connect using multicast capabilities in the switch, and that can support, and then you can actually cascade switches that also support multicast. And multiple clients can connect, but if you connect them all to the VS-R, then there's going to be a limit, because it can only really deal with a few streams. And each stream that the VS-R is generating is consuming bandwidth of the stream, so 4 megabits, 5 megabits, 10 megabits, whatever you want to use. Each separate stream and separate connection via HLS or Unicast, Multicast, is requiring that bandwidth on the connection to the switch. And the connection, if it's going via the internet, it's requiring that bandwidth on the uplink to the internet. So it's as I said, it's a light device. It's not a powerful server, and it's not going to support unlimited numbers of client connections. So on a LAN, we can use multicast without overloading the VS-R, but you can't really use that on the internet, even though there are some tunneling servers that can push a multicast connection across the internet to another site, but that's not the same as supporting multiple devices on the internet. So once you've exposed your VS-R to a public IP address and it's streaming it via, as a server via HLS or Rtsp, only a limited number of clients can connect, and I would say that would be under 10. And that is, again, each connection requires its own bandwidth for its own stream, so that if you connect 10 clients and you're streaming at 4 megabits, you're expecting your uplink to be 40 megabits. Now, maybe that's not, you haven't got a 40 megabit uplink, maybe you have, but if you're in a situation, you know, with a corporate network, I would doubt that your network manager would really like you doing that, because you'll be consuming a lot of a large proportion of the uplink connection. So the reason for using a content delivery network is so that you can avoid this multiple connections to the internet. And so essentially the content delivery network, it replicates and buffers and provides local servers to connect and provide streams to consumers. So why would we use a content delivery network? Well, the CDN, content delivery network, content distribution network, is a geographically distributed network of proxy servers and data centers. So essentially, the main providers of CDNs around the world, they have locally sited servers. They have good trunk connections to the internet, so these servers usually in data centers. They're local to the population who they want to serve, and they cache and buffer streams and files. If you're just publishing files, with some content distribution networks are about static files, and they buffer and they cache. They have knowledge of where the source file is. But essentially, it allows you to deliver streams to thousands of customers. So if you've got an application where the number of customers is above 10, above 100, up into the thousands, you need something like an Akamai or AWS or a Wowzer or something like that. And Wowzer is also a platform that can be installed on premise, so it can be installed on a server in your site. But again, then it requires the uplink bandwidth, so it's probably better for it to be installed in a data center on a server that you rent that's got a trunk connection to the internet. So essentially, CDN is useful when you're getting into large broadcasting, and provided by telcos as well. Online video platforms were originally just dealing with static files, but online video platforms, YouTube and Facebook, for example, now deal with streaming, and have now for some time. So then they capture the stream video as a permanent video that can be watched later. So there are lots of other live streaming services that you might want to use. And we support Wowzer through its APIs, either as a local installed service or as the cloud platform. Ustream, AWS Media Live, they can receive HLS or RTMP streams. Boxcast, RTMP, Daycast, we support their APIs for pairing, and you get a pairing key that you put into through the API into VS-R configuration. And again, Twitch, Periscope, all of these other Mixer, Vimeo, they can all be used with VS-R, typically using the RTMP output. So that's, if you really need to go to a lot of users, you need to use one of these online platforms. Of course, Facebook and YouTube can support a lot of users because they have the infrastructure to do that. But of course, that's more public. And if you want a private connection, or your customer wants a private connection for their clients, not a public internet connection, then you'd probably use something like Wowzer or Daycast, where you can subscribe and get a client that accesses directly. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing. We've got to reach the end of the slides, and I'm going to open for any questions that have come up. And I don't know if anybody's been posting on the chat. Seems not, but I'm sure you've got questions. And this has been a rather in-depth view of some of the things that you might have to set up, or your customers might have to set up. And we've been capturing a lot of these questions in an FAQ. And so we've got a rather lengthy FAQ document, which I'm going to show you. I'll quickly share my screen again. And this has just been, there's the FAQ. Okay, these are some of the questions that have come in. This document is, I don't know, 12 pages long right now. Where do I get information? Why would I use balanced inputs and outputs? Collecting input, the output, and I'm not seeing anything. Okay, the VS-R is not, doesn't have a pass-through, it has a decode output. And then what are latencies? Well, latencies are, you know, if you're using RTP, you can get down to around 2 seconds latency. And with the HLS around 5 to 6, but can go longer if you've got more chunks and larger chunks. So if you've got 10 chunks of 2 seconds, depending on which decoder you're using, it can be from 10 to 20 seconds. So there's lots of information here and this is going to be published. It's just being reviewed right now, and it will be published on the web. But if you want a copy of this document, I can send it to you because there is a lot of information and questions that you will be asked for sure, because we've already been asked the majority of these questions. As you see, there's lots of information here. How do I use the API, for example? What is the API? How do I control VS-R? These questions are coming up quite regularly. And so let's just stop the show again. So please feel free. I see we've got one. With Microsoft Stream, I didn't manage to get Microsoft Stream to work. I'm going to have another go at it. But so far, I didn't. It should work, and I don't know why it doesn't work when all the other services that use RTMP work, but I couldn't get it to work either. So I will have another go at that. It's one question from Lee Stevens. But I think it's likely to be a problem on the Microsoft side rather than on the VS-R side, considering that all the other platforms are working with RTMP. The thing I wanted to do was to try it through Restream Dot Io and see if that worked, because that's another way. Restream Dot Io also delivers via RTMP. So if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to enable your microphones and video and ask me. And if not, you can always ask anybody at CMI or myself. And I'm Chris at tapp.eu, and just send me an email or send your Tascam contact or CMI contact. And if there are no other questions, then I'd just pass you over to Corey just to say a few words.
Yeah, look, if there are no other questions, I just want to really thank Chris. Sorry, I'm out of focus here. Just really want to thank Chris for his time once again, especially the last one. A lot of feedback from the session was an incredibly valuable session to sit in, and I think equally this one will prove to be so. So we really want to thank you once again for allowing us to be able to present these sessions. If anyone does have any questions post the event, please feel free to reach out to your account manager, and we'll see if we can answer accordingly. And also, if you do want to review this session again, we will be posting the information in relation to how you can view it again. So even if you've got some colleagues that want to be able to review it, we can then pass that information on. And just once again, just thank you so much, Chris, for your time.
No problem, and thanks, and sorry about the slight technical difficulties with the publishing online, but the video is being recorded and there will be links, and we'll send you that and the PowerPoint file as well.
Yeah, perfect.
And again, if anybody's got any questions, anything that you need to know, there's a couple other messages. Oh, just thank you for the presentation. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time, and if we can help you to satisfy the customers with the VS-R, then certainly that's our task. And things so far have been going swimmingly, and lots of installations going on all over the place, and in all kinds. And we'll be also publishing some case studies to go with those, and real life sites that have gone live, working with our first streaming products. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, so I'll close the session now, and great. Thanks for attending.